Hey, it's Mark here, and welcome to the next edition of the Employee Survival Guide, where I tell you, as always, what your employer does definitely not want you to know about, and a lot more.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a workplace where, well, beneath the surface of daily operations, some deeply unsettling allegations start to emerge. They reveal a stark contrast between what's seen and what's actually endured by some employees. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a really compelling case. It landed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas, and it involves a company called TNT Crane and Rigging, Inc., and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. So for this deep dive, we've laid out a stack of the primary legal documents. We got the initial complaint filed by the EEOC, then the company's detailed response, their answer, and finally, a pretty significant consent decree that brings the whole case to a close. Our mission? Well, it's to pull out the most important insights from these filings. What exactly was alleged? How did the company push back? And, what does this final resolution truly mean for everyone involved? Especially since, and this is key, there was never a single court ruling on the actual facts of the case. It's a fascinating look at how workplace justice can sort of unfold sometimes.
It really is. What's truly insightful here, I think, is how this case demonstrates that even without that formal court ruling, just the sheer weight of the allegations and, frankly, the desire to avoid a long, costly legal battle that can compel a company to enact some really sweeping reforms and pay out substantial sums of money.
Right.
It reveals this powerful dynamic of legal pressure, acting as a catalyst for change, regardless of whether guilt is actually admitted on paper.
Okay, so let's start where the legal process did with the EEOC's complaint. Now, the EEOC, just for anyone who might not know, that's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They're the federal agency responsible for enforcing the federal laws against workplace discrimination.
Based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, genetic information.
Exactly. And here they brought this action under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and also the Civil Rights Act of 1991. So what exactly were they alleging happened over at TNT Crane and Rigging?
Well, Title VII is really the foundational law here. It broadly prohibits employment discrimination based on those protected characteristics you just listed, race, color, and so on. But crucially, it also prohibits retaliation against people who complain about discrimination or, participate in an investigation.
Okay.
So in this specific case, the EEOC alleged a sort of two-pronged violation. First, a race-based hostile work environment, and second, illegal retaliation.
Now, let's zero in on some of the specifics detailed in the complaint, because some of this is, pretty shocking stuff. It alleges that starting back in at least August 2018, 4 Black employees, Lorenzo Smith, Edwin Creighton, Freddie Campbell, and Jason Pradia, were subjected to a race-based hostile work environment. And we're talking about a field manager and several other employees reportedly being, and this is a quote, common and frequent users of racial slurs and jokes, including use of the N-word. For instance, Lorenzo Smith. He was a crane operator. He was allegedly told by a field manager, "Ninger, if you are going to bitch about it, you can turn that truck around and take your ass home." This was apparently when he asked for assistance.
Wow.
Similarly, Edwin Creighton was allegedly called the N-word by a field manager who supposedly said, "Nigga, if you don't want the job, go home." And Jason Pradia reportedly heard a white coworker say things like, "A lot of Black people are fucking lazy. You're different. You're not like other binkers. You work, though. That's what I like about you." And he also apparently heard that same coworker say about another Black employee, "He is a minker. He's lazy."
Right.
It's just
Right.
really blatant stuff alleged.
Absolutely blatant. And it wasn't just verbal either, right?
Yeah. No, exactly. The allegations weren't limited to verbal abuse. The complaint also described threatening and offensive imagery that was apparently present at their Fort Worth facility. This included specific mentions of nooses and also lightning bolt stickers identified with white supremacy displayed on the cranes. I mean, what's the impact of seeing symbols like that, these powerful, hate-filled symbols right there in your workplace?
Well, that's a really crucial distinction, actually, because the presence of physical symbols like nooses or those lightning bolts, which are, deeply associated with racial terror and white supremacy, it just escalates the severity of a hostile work environment claim significantly. It moves beyond just offensive words, right? It becomes a visual, almost pervasive threat that can make the workplace feel inherently unsafe, deeply intimidating.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
It's like a constant, stark reminder of racial animosity.
Yeah.
It directly impacts an employee's psychological well-being, their ability to just do their job without feeling harassed or threatened.
And so what happens when someone actually dares to speak up against an environment like that? The complaint gets into the alleged retaliation against Nathan Cook. He is a white crane operator. He reportedly witnessed and complained about the racial slurs in these symbols. He even specifically reported seeing a noose on the back fence of the Fort Worth yard back in February 2019, and also those lightning bolt stickles on the cranes. According to the complaint, after he made these complaints and, openly admitted he was involved in reporting it, things apparently went downhill for him very quickly. His personal vehicle tires were flattened. He was physically confronted by a coworker. He was called awful slurs like wigger, nigger lover, and a snitch.
Terrible.
Yeah. And his regular and overtime hours were allegedly cut. He was even labeled a troublemaker by the branch manager. It all ultimately led him to feel he had no choice but to resign because the working conditions were just, in his words, intolerable.
And this aspect of the case, it really highlights the critical importance of those anti-retaliation provisions in Title VII. It's just not enough to prohibit discrimination on paper.
Right.
Employees have to feel safe enough to actually report it without fearing negative consequences. And when an employee, especially someone like Cook, who wasn't even the direct target of the initial discrimination but was speaking up as an ally, when they face such severe backlash, well, it sends a really chilling message throughout the entire workforce, doesn't it? It tells everyone about the real risks involved in reporting misconduct.
Absolutely. And according to the complaint, despite all these serious reports being made to various levels of management, we're talking branch manager, safety director, operations manager, even HR, the EEOC alleged that TNT Crane and Rigging just failed to engage in any effective response, any thorough investigation, or any meaningful corrective action. So that's the powerful and pretty unsettling narrative laid out by the EEOC. But, okay, having heard those grave accusations, the obvious next question is, how did TNT Crane and Rigging defend themselves? What do they say in court?
Right.
When a company faces a complaint like this, their formal legal response is called an answer. And in their answer, TNT Crane and Rigging flatly denied that these claims had any merit whatsoever.
Yeah, and legally speaking, that's standard procedure. When a defendant files an answer, they go through each allegation, basically line by line. They either admit it, deny it, or sometimes they state they lack sufficient information to respond either way. But it's really crucial for listeners to understand this. Denying liability or saying you lack information is absolutely not an admission that the facts alleged by the other side are true.
Okay, important distinction.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So here, TNT Crane and Rigging admitted some very basic, undisputed facts. Like, yes, these individuals were employed by them. Yes, Lorenzo Smith worked at a specific mole site. Yes, Cook claimed to have seen a noose. But they were very clear, very specific in denying that they engaged in any unlawful employment practices or that they failed to respond effectively or investigate the complaints properly.
And they also brought up several affirmative defenses, right? What were those about?
Right. Think of affirmative defenses as their even-if arguments. Like, even if some of what the EEOC alleges were true, here's why we still shouldn't be held legally liable.
Okay.
So, for example, they argued that the EEOC's complaint itself might have been technically flawed in some way, or maybe that some claims were just too old, barred by the statute of limitations. They also claimed that any allegations that went beyond the scope of the original internal complaints filed by the employees shouldn't be allowed in court. And furthermore, they asserted they had widely disseminated anti-discrimination policies already in place. They argue any actions the company did take were for perfectly legitimate, non-discriminatory, non-retaliatory business reasons. They even raised the defense that maybe some of the alleged bad actions were outside the scope of employment of the specific individuals accused, meaning those employees weren't acting on behalf of the company when they did those things. Or, alternatively, that these were at-will employees, meaning, in theory, they could be terminated for almost any reason not specifically prohibited by law. And finally, they argued that if any violations did occur, they weren't willful or malicious, and that the individuals involved hadn't done enough to minimize their own damages. Quite a list. It is quite a list. A strong denial across the board, it sounds like. Absolutely. A very robust defense strategy. Which makes it particularly striking that despite these strong denials and this whole set of defenses, the parties ultimately chose to resolve the case through a consent decree.
Right, the settlement.
Exactly. It's a very common and actually quite powerful legal tool. Both sides agree to a settlement, and the court then oversees its implementation, making sure everyone follows through. But the key thing here, and we mentioned it earlier, is that it happens without any formal findings of fact by the court. And critically, without any admission of liability from the defendant, TNT Crane and Rigging in this case.
So why do it then?
Well, For TNT Crane and Rigging, it means they avoid the significant time commitment, the huge expenditure, and just the inherent risks that come with a contested trial. Trials can be unpredictable, incredibly costly, not just financially, but also reputationally.
Makes sense.
So settling via consent decree is often a strategic decision to mitigate further damage, even if you maintain you did nothing wrong.
Okay, so if the court didn't rule on the facts and the company didn't admit any guilt, what does this consent decree actually do? What does it mean practically for TNT Crane and Rigging and for the individuals involved? Let's start with the money side. The decree lays out specific monetary relief. Nathan Cook, remember, the white employee who complained and faced alleged retaliation, he's set to receive $200,000, and that includes back pay, interest, and damages. Then Lorenzo Smith is to receive $115,000. Edwin Creighton gets $85,000. Freddie Campbell, $75,000, and Jason Pridia, $50,000. And these amounts are specifically for compensatory and punitive damages.
So if you put that all together, it totals $525,000 in monetary relief distributed among those 5 individuals.
$500,000.
Exactly, $500,000. And while, again, it's not an admission of guilt, that kind of payout sends a very clear financial signal, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
It really underscores the substantial risk and the potential cost companies face when these kinds of allegations surface. It shows how settlements often become that strategic decision to just cut their losses and avoid potentially even greater financial and reputational damage from a long trial. It's definitely a significant outcome for the alleged victims here.
Okay, but beyond the money, what really caught my eye in this decree is the comprehensive plan for actual systemic change within TNT Crane and Rigging. That seems really important.
Yes, absolutely. That's often a major component of these EEOC settlements.
So first, the company is permanently enjoined, which means they're strictly prohibited by a court order, right?
Correct. It's a binding legal order.
Okay, so they're permanently enjoined from engaging in any employment practice that discriminates based on race. That includes creating or even just tolerating a hostile work environment or retaliating against anyone for opposing unlawful practices. That feels like a big one, a direct command from the court binding them forever.
It is a very big deal. It sets a clear, ongoing legal standard they must adhere to.
Right. And second, the company has to implement brand new, very detailed Title VII policies and procedures. And these policies can't just be vague statements. They have to specifically describe what constitutes prohibited harassment and discrimination. They have to explicitly mention things like racial slurs, jokes, and hate symbols. They also need to clearly define what a hostile work environment actually means in practice, state unequivocally that retaliation won't be tolerated, and outline the specific disciplinary actions for violators right up to potentially being fired.
And there's another layer, too, for managers specifically.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, managers now have a clear affirmative duty under this decree to actively monitor the work environment for any signs of trouble. And they have to promptly report any suspected harassment or discrimination they see or hear about. And the decree explicitly states that failing to do so is grounds for disciplinary action against the manager, potentially even immediate discharge. So it puts the onus on management to be proactive.
Wow, okay. So accountability is being built in there.
Exactly. But then a critical question comes up. How do employees actually report these issues safely and effectively? Does the decree address that?
It does seem to. It mandates a complaint procedure that must have multiple avenues for reporting. It makes sure that just making an oral complaint is sufficient. You don't necessarily have to put it in writing.
That's important. Removes a barrier.
Yeah, and it says the company can't impose unreasonable burdens or time limits on employees who want to report something. Flexibility seems key. Investigations have to be prompt, thorough, and impartial, and they have to keep meticulous records of everything. Plus, there's a new requirement for an employee hotline that goes directly to the Vice President of Human Resources.
So another channel, potentially bypassing local management if needed.
Right, another layer of accessibility and maybe oversight.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about preventing this from happening again? Is there training involved?
Oh, yes. Training is a huge component of this decree. And really, for any company trying to make real change, it has to be, right?
Absolutely essential.
So all employees at TNT Crane and Rigging's Texas branches will get at least 1 hour of mandatory training on Title VII and these new company policies. This training will cover what's prohibited harassment, discrimination, retaliation. It'll cover how to report incidents and what the disciplinary consequences are for anyone who violates the rules.
Okay, baseline for everything.
Exactly. But then there's also specialized training. Anyone designated as a responsible official, basically.
Yeah.
Someone involved in doing investigations or making decisions on corrective actions. They have to receive no less than 2.5 hours of very specific training. This training focuses on how to conduct proficient, lawful Title VII investigations.
So building internal capacity.
Precisely. It gets into critical details like how do you identify sources of evidence? What are effective interviewing techniques? Why is it important to consider past complaints about an individual? And how do you do post-investigation monitoring to make sure the misconduct or retaliation doesn't just pop up again? It's about really building that internal expertise and accountability structure.
That sounds quite thorough. Anything else in terms of ongoing requirements?
Yes, a couple more things. For 3 years, TNT Crane and Rigging has to post clear notices in conspicuous places, break rooms, bulletin boards, that kind of thing. These notices have to inform all employees of their rights under Title VII and the company's commitment to preventing discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. And crucially, these notices must also include specific rules prohibiting the creation and display of hate symbols, like the ones that were alleged in the original complaint.
So a constant visual reminder of the rules and rights.
Exactly. And finally, for that entire 3-year period, the company has ongoing reporting and record-keeping obligations directly to the EEOC.
The oversight piece.
Right. They have to submit detailed reports on all future complaints they receive related to racial harassment, race discrimination, or retaliation, and they have to detail exactly how the company responded to each one. This level of oversight is really designed to ensure they actually sustain compliance over time.
That makes sense. It keeps the pressure on.
So, okay, we've walked through the unsettling allegations, the company's denials, and now this really detailed settlement agreement. How does this particular deep dive help us understand the bigger picture, the broader landscape of workplace justice and accountability? We started with these really serious allegations, racial harassment, retaliation, shocking details about slurs and hate symbols. The company consistently denied they did anything wrong, and yet, through this consent decree, they've committed to paying out over $500,000 and making these sweeping, court-mandated changes to their policies, their training, their reporting structures, everything.
Yeah, I think this case vividly highlights how the legal system, even when it works through a negotiated settlement rather than a full trial and verdict, can still be an incredibly powerful driver for substantial shifts in corporate behavior.
Yeah.
It really underscores not only the importance of federal laws like Title VII in trying to ensure fair and safe workplaces for everybody, but also the absolutely critical role that agencies like the EEOC play in actually enforcing those laws and pushing for meaningful, concrete change.
Right.
It shows how that legal pressure, that threat of litigation, can bring about significant reforms even when guilt isn't formally admitted on the record.
Yeah, that's a great point. And maybe here's a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to mull over after we wrap up. When a company agrees to such extensive, costly reforms and pays out over $500,000, all while still formally denying any wrongdoing, what does that really tell us about the true nature of accountability and maybe the complexities in the pursuit of justice when it comes to these difficult workplace disputes? Something to think about.
If you like the Employee Survival Guide, I'd really encourage you to leave a review. We try really hard to produce information to you that's informative, that's timely, that you can actually use and solve problems on your own and at your employment. So if you like to leave a review anywhere you listen to our podcast, please do so. And leave 5 stars, because anything less than 5 is really not as good, right? I'll keep it up. I'll keep the standards up. I'll keep the information flowing at you. If you'd like to send me an email and ask me a question, I'll actually review it and post it on there. You can send it to mcarui@capclaw.com. That's capclaw.com.